Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer, and my co-host here, Deb Romero, certified Alexander technique instructor. And today's topic is about impulsion in horses. What the heck does
What
impulsion
is
mean?
that?
What is it? How do we how do we tell if our horse has impulsion or doesn't have impulsion?
Right.
And how is impulsion different than speed, which we measure in
Mm,
miles per hour, and stride length, like we talked about in the tracking up
the tracking up
episode,
one. Yep.
right? So most of us are kind of looking at tracking up, or we've been trained in traditional training to look at tracking up or forward solves all problems. So faster equals better. If you have a problem with a horse, push them forward, and that puts them back in balance. That's another really common belief system that's out there that's actually disengaging our horse's hindquarters more often than it's engaging our horse's hindquarters.
Right.
So what's your concept? Like if somebody asked you, "Hey Deb, what's impulsion in horses?" I hear it at shows, I see it on test scores. Um, what
Wow, that's a
is
good one. The word that comes up for me is rhythm and tempo. That there's a cadence about it.
That's because we're on the same page. That's exactly what I would say.
But engagement, impulsion, all to me, go together.
Yeah, because
I would think about it as an Alexander person as all joints are open and available and being used appropriately.
open and available, does that mean we're loose? Or what
No,
is
that
that?
there's enough availability because the body is balanced that the organism as a whole can function appropriately without tension somewhere.
So what's appropriately? What does that mean? Like,
So
what does it mean for you as an AT instructor when you say appropriate, like obviously appropriate to the task or
right,
maintaining the integrity of your use, no matter what you're doing.
right.
But what are some tangible things that tell you somebody's doing that or not doing that?
Um so all the ability to accept the stimulus without contracting and getting smaller and shorter. Contract and pulling down around the activity instead of being open and available to do the activity.
So seeing someone hunch or draw in muscularly
Right.
would be sort of the reaction to the stimulus, you're saying?
Right.
And
Or,
then
and fetal is a normal reaction for everybody. The pull back with the reins,
as a
that's a
stress response. Yeah.
it's a stress response.
Yeah.
So all of those, being able to tap into your own subconscious ability to have the best function you can. And that just takes a lot of work.
Well, and it's such an intangible sort of description that
It
I'm having a
is.
hard time picturing it. So if I do you think people, if we say tempo, or sorry, if we say impulsion is sort of the ability to maintain a steady rhythm or a precise tempo, would you say that's true for people? At like that's how I look at in horses, you can't have a steadiness of tempo. You cannot have a precision of tempo, which is what rhythm is,
Right.
if the hindquarters are disengaged, if the axial skeleton in the horse is not stable. So if the skull, spine, pelvis, and rib cage are moving around too much,
Mhm.
I'm going to see muscles shortening and contracting. I'm going to see, especially through the neck, like we talked
Right.
about.
Yep. It's
And
just disorganization.
and the
It's
horse will not be
dysfunction.
able, like I
Mhm.
guess what you're saying, joints open and available. To me, I go, a horse can't keep a rhythm. So they're
Ah,
either going like speeding up all the time, slowing down, trying to halt all the time,
Right.
or sort of like cacophony, sort of like just, no rhythm. It's just sort of going a little bit fast, a little bit slow, a little bit fast, a little bit
Right.
slow. And it sounds like, a, oh my God, I was about to show my age. A record player with the speed getting wonky. Although I
Drives you
guess
nuts, doesn't
turntables and vinyl are
it?
back, so somebody will know what I mean.
I get it.
But sort of
It's an
that.
it's a it's like a healthy availability, you know, to create that level of movement
What do you mean healthy availability?
that the human or the person, like you said, their head, neck, back, and pelvis is organized to a level that they can access impulsion in their own body.
So they can find a rhythm, you're saying the same way that a horse finds a rhythm, which is
Right,
basically stabilizing the spine, stabilizing the pelvis. And if we say hindquarter engagement, whether it's human or horse,
right,
equals pelvic stability during motion. The bones of the pelvis are moving minimally, in fact, imperceptibly to our sight. We
right.
can't see the bones move. And so
And that's a great point because is we've talked about it before in humans as in horses, is the pelvis truly connected to the whole spine, or is it disengaged? It happens in people too.
exactly, exactly. So
Right.
when we can see whether it's a horse or a person, when we sort of see a lot of excess motion around the pelvic bones, well, when we can see instability or those bones moving around, that's putting quite a lot of pressure on the SI joint and it's throwing off everything above it in the human or everything in front of it in the horse. And
Right.
so you can't have impulsion without hindquarter engagement in horses.
Right.
I mean, you can use bit leverage and you can use spurs and you can kind of get a rhythm, but you can't really develop impulsion. And so I've had to play with, like, even in the dictionary, impulsion sort of leads us, the words sort of make it sound like faster, more power, more speed.
And I think
And
we relate those words is the problem too. We think power means more.
yeah, and part of the definition, like under a few layers, was the desire to move. And I went,
Oh, that's
that's
interesting.
that's the definition I'm
That's
actually
huge.
looking for when I'm talking about impulsion, is because the easiest way to feel if our horse has impulsion or doesn't is the balance between self-propelled movement and self-controlled movement. And so if our horse is constantly trying to halt and we have to drive with our seat, use our legs all the time just to keep the horse forward, especially in walk, I go, then the horse is not self-propelled.
Right.
And that can even be true on a lunge line with people chasing horses around with whips. I go, as soon as we refrain from using our leg aids, a whip or spurs or anything like that, to me is the request to go forward. But if my horse has impulsion, then my horse maintains the forward after the request. That's what I call self-propelled movement,
Right.
which is half of the equation of
Right.
impulsion.
Right.
So if my horse is always trying to stop and I'm constantly pushing my horse forward, I know for sure my horse doesn't have impulsion.
Yeah, and what comes to mind to me is what I'm seeing with this chestnut here that we just started riding him, how much the rider's position affects the ability of the horse to find any kind of self-organization.
Yeah. So like constant leg aids or driving with the seat
Hmm.
is also ironically going to further cause the horse to not want to go forward.
Yeah, they kind of
because,
put they what do I call it? They like backpedal.
well,
They just
first of
push
all,
against it.
the horse goes, you keep working harder. I'm just going to focus on halting. As soon as you stop the aid, I'm going to halt. So the horse is conserving energy by not being self-propelled and making the rider do all the work. The other thing is, the more we move our seat and legs and skeleton, even in a cart, even if we're not riding, um, the more we're kind of introducing different forces that the horse has to cope with. And
Right.
so the horse actually tightens the back muscles a lot and tries to slow down in order to protect themselves.
Right. And to deal with all the physical forces from the rider and the saddle and all that.
And I see that horrible sort of catch 22 happen all the time, that the
Mm-hmm.
less our horse desires to go forward, the busier we get with the whip, our legs, our seat, whatever. We just get busy thinking if we let our horse stop, they'll never learn how to go forward. So we're essentially taking over our horse's job of impulsion. And so how can they learn?
Right.
If they're not practicing, they're never going to learn. So it gets into this perpetual cycle of always having to drive a horse forward that isn't good at being self-propelled.
Right.
So the first thing I tell people is you're going to have to be a little patient with the speed. I go, as long as your horse is not stopping and you're
That's
not
a good
giving an
point
aid, then we're beginning to develop self-propelled movement.
because I just see these people driving for this big walk, which I don't know where that came from, but
Well,
it's
in the driving, like our seat, which I consider the seat of the rider, is still a seat if you're in a cart. Doesn't matter if you're straddling or in a cart or even working on the ground. Our seat is from the base of our pelvis, our seat bones, to our first lowest rib. So it
okay.
includes our lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis is what I call the seat. And so that involves our core muscles, our low back, and our pelvis. And if that area of our body is not stable, then our horse can't balance. We're like that's the one area of our body, especially as riders, but even in carts, we're receiving all the forces of
Hmm.
motion right there.
Yeah.
And so it's the most difficult place for us to stabilize, but it's the most important place to find stability first and foremost if we want to develop impulsion in our horse
Right.
or even just balance our horse in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Learning to be neutral
But
and
completely, it's critical when it comes to the aspect of impulsion because as long as we're wiggly or so stiff that we're bouncing all over the place, our horse can't use the back muscles properly. And the back muscles have to equalize the forces of forward propulsion, sort of generated by the push of the hind legs, and manage stabilizing motion and body weight. So it has these two different, and we talked about this before, even in a podcast on muscle fiber types, that the fiber types of all the back muscles and the hindquarter muscles are almost equal parts for locomotion and for stability. And that's their role. So impulsion not only includes, it's impossible without a stable pelvis, right? So
right.
without hindquarter engagement, you can't get there.
Right.
And then if the back is contracting against the rider for any reason, because
Hmm.
the rider is too unstable or too heavy in the seat or whatever, then the back muscles can't work properly equalizing those two functions. So you never get impulsion. What you
Right.
get is a horse you're always pushing forward or a horse you're always holding back. And so the self-propelled part of it is where our slow horse that wants to stop all the time drives us insane, and we just want to push, push, push. We can't help ourselves. But until we refrain Like one of the best ways to the horses, start our horse learning self-propelled movement is we let them stop and then we give the aid. And then they take
Right.
three little lethargic steps and they stop again. And we have to be so disciplined to wait for the halt and then give the aid. But when we do that, going from walk to halt back to walk actually takes more energy than in the horse's body than if we constantly push to maintain forward motion. So that energy has to come from somewhere. And if we're the one doing it, then it's not coming from our horse.
Right.
So if we're patient, the transitions burn more fuel, just like city miles are less fuel efficient than highway miles. And
Yeah.
I find most horses, maybe one or two sessions, they stop a lot. And we have to be really disciplined and patient before pushing them back into or asking back into the walk. But they very quickly feel the fuel inefficiency and they just start to maintain their walk pretty quickly. And the same
Yeah.
is true for trot and canter. Maintaining trot and canter doesn't have to come all at once.
True. I share with people when they get frustrated on that constant stopping is that that's a time for them to check in. What are they doing? Take the
Right.
time when the horse comes to a halt. Whoa, where am I?
Right. Am
Is
I
the
still
horse
in
putting me
balance?
somewhere? Am I being dumped forward? Am I blocking? Because what I've seen with some people and most people is when you think forward, trot, walk, whatever, we tend to close around it.
Or
And
get
I'm
ahead of it?
or get ahead of it. So I'm wondering, if we use the Alexander pause and inhibit and just ask and wait instead of already being in the next mode. I'm wondering
Yeah.
if that also shuts down horses.
Well, it's the hardest part with a horse that doesn't really have a strong impulse to go forward.
Right,
That is the hardest part, is how often you have to pause and repeat. But that's the only way the horse starts to learn for themselves how to become self-propelled,
right,
which is part of the use of the back muscles, the spine, pelvic engagement, use of the hind legs. It's kind of a whole big mechanism that runs through the back hindquarters and strides of the hind legs. And so as soon as we take over that job and we're constantly pushing, driving, spurring, whipping, whatever, the horse just checks out
right.
and goes, "You just work a little harder, dear, and I'll be ready
This
for my break as soon as you
stupid
stop."
human.
Yeah, some horses really take advantage of that
They
because
do. They do.
they're
Yep.
kind of conserving energy
Yep.
while they're
That's
moving
funny.
forward, waiting to stop. And so
So
that's,
maybe it's what I like to say to people is invite the horse to move forward. It's an invitation.
yeah, or it's like, okay, the aid puts in the request,
Mhm.
but the horse has to fulfill the request. And if the horse doesn't fulfill it perfectly or right or to our expectations, are
Mm.
we turning into a bad boss who sort of hovers and goes, no, not like that, not
Not
like
like
that, not
that.
like that, right?
Not like that.
Or do we allow a little bit of room and a little bit of space for the horse to learn through trial and error? That's how they're going to learn. And
Right.
if we're too constant or too quick, trying to get our slow horse to have more energy or just to be self-propelled, then if we do the homework, they never learn. Like it might be a painful process to go through this teaching phase, but I go until the horse realizes it is my job to be self-propelled, not my rider's job.
And
Then
I think
they never get good at it.
um, people don't like failure. It just comes down to that the type A personality of wanting it right all the time, and that's just not realistic when you're working with another being.
Yeah. Or the way we learn isn't how everybody else learns.
Right.
And so whether we're teaching a child or a horse to empower them, right? That's the ultimate goal, self-carriage, to empower the horse with these skills. If we just, keep taking their term paper and typing it up or writing it for them, they're not going to get the education even if they move through the levels.
And that's a good point, being that I homeschooled both of my kids, the level of frustration that can go on between the two, or that,
Yeah. What do you
I mean,
mean you're not getting it? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're so
or
lazy.
what about I remember a time that my daughter is 20 months younger than my son, and he got all pissed off because she learned algebra and he couldn't get it. It's like you're just not there yet. Your brain isn't in that mode. So getting frustrated and uh, being more aggressive with the horse just sends them into probably fight or flight. So you're not going to have the experience you want anyway.
Yeah. Like you're not going to spur algebra into your son's head. It's just not going to
He was so
happen.
pissed about that. But mom, it doesn't matter if you're older than her. When the student is ready to learn, they're ready to learn, and nobody can force that.
And the process is so wildly unpredictable.
Yes.
People are asking me for time frames all the time, and I
All the
go,
time.
I go, I can do the best I can in the time we have, but it depends on how the horse responds. It depends on the learning curve for that unique horse integrating the important information that I need this horse to learn in order to have self-carriage, in order to have a strong foundation. And some horses whip through some parts of training and then get really stuck at another part of
Right.
training.
It's just like kids.
And
It's
it
the
has
same thing.
nothing to do with the level of difficulty.
No.
Sometimes it's the easy stuff that a horse gets stuck on. And I go, like, for example, just being self-propelled. I go, there's so many horses out there that are being driven forward mercilessly. You're not fast enough. You're not energetic enough. You're trying to stop all the time. And we think if we fill in the gap, if we can just give them that last little push, one day it's going to tip into, oh, I've got it. And I
So,
never see that happen. I always see it go the other way. The horse just gets
right.
less forward and less
Right.
forward.
Or more dysfunctional the more we push them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe they give us the energy in a grossly dysfunctional use of their body.
Right. Because the human is thinking we have got to do this
Yeah.
at letter A or whatever.
So let's look at the
Whatever.
other half of impulsion. The opposite side is self-controlled motion. So impulsion to me, in order to get a very precise tempo or rhythm, we need equal parts self-propelled and self-controlled. We need the impulse to move forward, but at the same time, the ability to manage forward motion and manage body weight. Otherwise, some horses who can't do that just go faster and faster and faster and have a very hard time slowing down. And those horses actually tend to do better in the show ring because we stick some leverage in their mouth and we can kind of
And we're
hold that
okay.
energy
Yeah.
back. Yeah. It's really the horses without self-propelled energy drive us more crazy than the horses with too much energy until they get scared or anxious and we can't stop them. Then we have a much bigger problem. We have a runaway, a bolt, a
Yeah. And how
spook.
did we get there?
How did that happen?
How'd that happen?
Yeah. The horse has no brakes. And so
And
horses that
like with Rafalco, your big guy, it also looked like when he was going through that was this fear of not being able to control himself.
Yeah, because without self-control over forward motion, what horses that go too fast are doing is they're trying to find stability through momentum. So it's the same reason we laugh at these videos across social media with people slipping on ice, falling down hills, or like if you imagine a little kid running down a steep hill, as soon as we feel unstable, going faster can sort of help us stabilize,
Right.
but it lacks self-control. We're
Yes, it
actually
does.
we're actually kind of using momentum as a stabilizing force, which it does, but you could just crash and burn at any second. Like it's really
Because
not
there's no braking mechanism that's kicking in.
right. So
Right.
one wrong step and you're kind of,
Deadpool.
yeah, ass over head, as they say. It's
Yep.
like, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So that's what horses are really seeking when they're hard to stop and hard to slow down. They don't have the back muscle strength or the hindquarter engagement that gives them control over their forward motion. So they're constantly sort of trying to use momentum just to gain some stability. That's why they go faster and faster and faster. And then they tend to buck or kick out
Right.
you know, or like in Rafalco's case, when I took away the double bridle, I thought he was going to do a somersault.
I did
Like
too. It
without
was
that
scary.
leverage in his mouth, he had very little self-control over his forward motion. He didn't own that inside his own skin. He
Mm-mm.
was dependent on the rider holding him up
Yeah.
in order to stabilize his movement. So self-controlled is related to what we call the braking, just like brakes in our car, brake. And that's the stabilizing use of the back muscles, the engagement of the hindquarter, which is also equal to stability, and it's the forward placement of our horse's hind legs,
Right.
right? So we actually increase degrees of engagement through self-control, not through more pushing. And
It's
so
kind
people,
yeah, it's kind of like the concept we use in the Alexander world about forward and up. The horse is forward, but he's also elastic to go up.
yeah, it's like a conversion of forward energy. So
Yep.
what the back muscles do when they stabilize, the same with the hindquarter muscles, as well as a stable axial skeleton with all those core muscles, as the force of propulsion is generated by the hoof pushing against the ground.
Right.
It's going to travel from the hind legs through the pelvis, through the back, and it's either going to be converted somewhat upward,
Right.
right? Or it's going to travel straight through and fall on the front legs.
Right.
That's your horse on the forehand,
Right.
right? So without pelvic engagement and equalizing the use of the back muscles, they can't manage the force of impulsion or
Mhm.
propulsion that they're generating. So they literally, horses without enough self-control are literally pushing themselves onto their own forehand every stride.
Right.
And that's the importance of that balance where we get rhythm is equal parts propulsion and the capacity to stabilize propulsion
Mhm.
has to be equal. So equal braking and pushing. And I go the easiest way we can sort of feel that is what we would call our horse being self-propelled and also self-controlled. So
Right.
in other words, if we loosen up the reins and take off the spurs, excuse me, if we give a light leg aid, and let's just talk about the walk because the balance in the trot and canter might be challenged, but you develop the balance in the trot and canter the same way you develop self-propelled motion. In that, if I give one leg aid, some horses I literally count strides before they halt
Right.
because they have no forward, right? So I
Right.
give one leg aid and the horse gives me 3 strides and then halts. And then I give another leg aid and they give me 3 strides. Well, maybe 15 minutes later, I give one leg aid and I get 100 strides. That's my horse learning how to be self-propelled.
I
And
think
so
that's a real important piece of the puzzle is time. It's just the
repetition.
repetition of good, healthy movement. It's kind of like the owner of the chestnut was here and she got on finer things, my little mare, which is like riding a fish. And it took her 45 minutes to get into the zone with this horse.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, this is great." And I said, "Yeah."
No, when I'm teaching a horse something new in training, if the horse shows me a few strides of what I'm looking to improve in the last 5 minutes of an hour, then I know I'm on the right track and this is
Right.
where we need to start working. But it'll take 55 minutes of not that, not that,
Not
not
that.
that, repeating, repeating, redoing it, repeating, repeating. And then if the horse gets it in the last 5 minutes, I go, okay, it's just a matter of practice.
Repeating good, healthy practice.
Yeah. If the horse can't even get one good stride of what I'm looking for in 60 minutes, then I go, maybe I'm asking too much right now. Maybe I need to make it a little easier first and build up to it.
Right.
But self-propelled is more a matter of disciplining the human
I totally
and
agree.
being patient.
Yeah.
Lack of self-control, I go instead of just always holding our horse back with heavy bit leverage or heavy reins or, holding our horse back in a rhythm. So if we let go of the
Mm.
reins, does our horse speed up?
Or
If the
fall.
answer, well, hopefully not
Or
that.
come to a screeching halt.
But if we loosen the reins and barely have a rein contact, does our horse walk fast and faster, faster? Does our horse break into trot or canter? Then we know how weak our horse is in that stabilizing use of the body. And so what I tend to do with horses that go too fast and have a hard time slowing down is I'll work with straight on a circle and I'll hardly use the reins at all. And if it starts to become too fast or a bit dangerous, if I have to use the reins, I bring them all the way to halt and then reset
Right.
and start again. I'm not going to just slow the speed with the reins. I'm going to stop the
That's a
feet.
good point. I think that's such an important point to let people know that halting is okay.
Yeah. We
It's
can redo
okay.
things.
We
Yeah.
can we can do a do-over again and again and again and revisit our own use. Am I interfering with this horse's path or am I helping this horse at this point?
Yeah. I did a whole newsletter on it's never too late to take a fresh start. And
Right.
that was Ronnie Willis, this old cowboy I worked with. And when things were going massively sideways between the horse and rider, because he usually worked with a group of professionals as we were working on colt starting clinics or something like that, or difficult horses. And he would always just ride up and go, because he was always on his horse, and he would ride up to somebody in the middle of chaos and sort of go, you know, it's never too late to take a fresh start.
Right.
And it just sort of jerked everybody sideways out of that chaos and went, there's a little room in there to just
Yeah,
take a redo. Yeah. And
exactly.
so whether we're trying to slow our horse down or get our horse to go more forward, it's that letting our horse be responsible
Hmm.
for their own motion is how they learn. And so we step in with the leg aid, but only after they make a mistake.
And for the human to take responsibility for their part of this equation.
Oh, yeah, because you got a full-time job trying to
Yep.
keep your balance on a horse that won't go forward or won't slow down. I
Right.
go, that's hard enough. So that's why we need the leg aids when the horse fails to move forward or goes from trot to walk. Once the horse is walking, we can use the leg aid again to go back into trot, or from
Mhm.
trot to canter, or from walk to halt back to walk. But if we allow a full transition, that uses up a boatload of our horse's energy.
Right.
So they learn very quickly what the law of inertia feels like, and they start to maintain a gait once they're comfortable to do that, right? And
Right.
the same thing if our horse won't slow down, if they break into trot, we can use the reins, bring them back down to walk, and then loosen the reins again and sort of see how many strides could you walk before you break back into trot, right? Or if the
Right.
walk is sort of teetering on trot, going faster and faster, we could use the reins to bring the horse all the way down to halt and then let go of the reins and go, how long can you maintain halt before you walk forward? And some horses, it's like less than a second. Right? Because they're just not good at stabilizing. So they don't like halt and they can't walk slow. So in order to
Yeah.
develop impulsion, those are sort of the gross, drastic ways we get started is
Right.
to refrain from pushing our horse forward and holding our horse back. And
Right.
instead, just repeat the leg aid 10,000 times.
In a
Just
nice way.
in a nice way, just repeat the rein aid
Just
10,000 times. Or if the horse has already learned how to run through the bit, you're
mm.
going to get good at circles,
Yeah, I
right?
was gonna bring that up. I use circles a lot instead of two direct pulls because there's a
Yes,
lot of horses.
that'll
They've been
panic.
so debauched with bit and rein contact, it's sometimes easier just to put them on a circle to get them to decelerate
Yeah,
and bring themselves back down. Yeah.
yeah. At least the circle sort of dynamically slows the body. Like if they're trying to use momentum for stability, then fighting that momentum is sort of a force on top of our horse's body weight. And so when we use a circle, just like if you drive your car on a roundabout, it naturally slows down. You have to give it
Right.
gas, right? So anytime we're driving and we hit a curvy road, our car naturally slows down even though we haven't hit the brakes, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the dynamic counterbalance to a horse trying to use momentum for stability. And you can just let the horse wind down on a circle.
Right. And that I think is an education for them within themselves instead of yanking on them to slow down or whatever, let them figure out how to decelerate.
Well, and it's what I had to do with the same horse, Rafalco, who came out of
Right.
dressage training, because as soon as I took two reins, the harder I
Off to
pulled,
the races.
the more he curled his neck and went faster.
Yeah.
And my
That's
first
scary.
horse as a teenager was 30 days off the freaking track. And if you pull back on a racehorse, they go faster.
Right.
And so I learned very quickly as a teenager that circles were my best friend.
Yeah, their circles are good. We like circles.
Yeah, because also with some horses, like my off the track thoroughbred, if you try to bend the neck, like they teach to disengage the hindquarters, if you try to bend the neck to
Mhm.
shut him down, he would just put his nose on my toe and haul ass straight forward. I go, that was not going to work.
Just remember, you have to have a lot of tools in your tool belt. It's not
Yeah.
always one thing works for every horse.
Well, circles always work. I go, and now I understand the physics of why they work. And it can be a big circle, it doesn't have to be a small circle. But if I can get a horse that either leans on the bit, takes the bit and runs with it, or just is so dull that the reins don't work anymore, I go, the circles always teach them how to start gaining more self-control over their body. That is the only consistent way that I found across breeds, across ages, or whatever. And everything else I go might work, might not. Not sure. But once our horse can, let's say a horse that has no capacity to control movement, can start to maintain the walk and not break into trot and canter. I go, that's my first sign that this horse is learning self-control over forward movement or half of the impulsion factor. And then once my horse goes forward, even in a cloud of turtle dust, if I don't have to use my legs to
Initiates forward on his own,
maintains forward,
maintain forward on its own. Okay.
I can put in the request. That's my leg
Right.
aid. But even if it's in a cloud of turtle dust, if I'm not having to use a second leg aid just to maintain the walk, then my horse is learning the other half of the impulsion equation,
Right.
self-propelled. So that's what we have to be patient with. Our horse might is not, let me just say for sure. Our horse that's too fast is not going to slow down quickly and gain that self-control. And our horse that doesn't want to go forward is not going to bring that energy level up anytime soon. It's going to
Right.
be either way because it's a physical weakness in the body.
It's a physiological, I mean, it goes down to neurotransmitters and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, it has everything to do with hindquarter engagement and disengagement, whether the back is dropping or lifting, how the back muscles are working, how much arthritis you have in those hind legs, whether they can even comfortably swing forward and push backwards. Like all of those are factors into how our horse lost impulsion. And so developing impulsion, we have to measure progress in sort of these, I don't know, mile markers
Baby
rather
steps.
rather
Baby.
than not really baby steps, but it's like it's going to take a while to hit your first marker of success. And then it's going to feel like another mile of work before you hit
Mhm.
your next marker of success. But that's because core muscles have to strengthen, outer muscles have to resupple, the skeleton has to, like, there's so much going on physically that we can't expect it to come right away. We wouldn't expect that in our own bodies.
No.
We don't go to physical therapy and we're fixed in 90 days. Like
Right.
we
No.
learn what to do to fix ourselves, but we still have to do the work.
And that's a really good point because I wonder if the same thing happens with PT is they kind of focus on the problem, but don't, once the problem is better, do they integrate it, through the whole system?
Yeah, or I think it's evolved a lot, PT for humans.
Yeah,
And I s- I kind of think there's two major categories. There's the old PT theory that focuses on just range of motion through a specific joint or body part. And the new PT is really looking at the body more holistically.
that's good.
Yeah, there's some very good changes I've seen in PT.
Good.
Watching my mom and dad, aged parents going through it, there's some very good PT out there that really is going, how does that restoration of function through the joint fit into the whole? And looking
That's a
at
really good point.
balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the
Which
same, a lot of traditional horse training, like we talked about. We're trying to set the head and neck position. We're looking at tracking up. All of that is sort of the old way of thinking in that range of motion kind of category, where top human athletes and new PT is what we need to bring into horse training, that
Mhm.
it's a global situation. There's a whole body here that we need to consider and everything is changing at once. You can't just push the leg forward without affecting the back and the neck
Right.
and the shoulders. So you can't just get out your bamboo pole and whack those legs forward or teach your horse to lift those legs over a jump without having an effect through the entire body. And
Yeah, and like the training I took, which at some point we will do on a podcast, that are we taking the athlete's own physical limits into the equation? Are we expecting this athlete to do something that it just at that point, because of its physical state, not able to do that?
well,
Do
and
we,
that's what horses that have no self-control, that
right?
are too fast, and horses that have no go, that are too slow and not self-propelled. Both of those are indicating to us our horse is physically
Can't do it.
very weak,
Hmm. Yep,
very weak. And no amount of bit leverage or spurs is going to
exactly.
increase the strength of our horse in the right way. And so we have to really change how we're thinking about it. When we refrain from our aids, but we repeat them 10,000 times. I go that repetition of aids after allowing our horse to make the same mistake 10,000 times is how we build the strength of the
Right.
body. And that's why it doesn't happen fast, is because first the horse has to figure out, oh, you're not going to do this for me anymore. You're not going to do forward for me, or you're not going to hold me back.
Right.
And once they realize that, then they start working on the strength in their own body.
And it's really cool to see them start thinking.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
the
it's just
ultimate
a really
goal,
cool relationship when that starts happening.
absolutely. Like once we work through sort of the gross outer parts of self-controlled and self-propelled,
Mhm.
what we're really doing that's most directly related to balance is where we started this conversation. The only indicator that I rely on when it comes to impulsion is tempo and rhythm. And the way I work with it in training is there's all kinds of metronome apps you can
Yeah, there
download on
are.
your phone. And in playing with different tempos with different horses at different stages of development, like slower tempos are easier for horses learning impulsion
Mhm.
and balancing that sort of pushing and braking capacity of their body. Competition requires quicker tempos, which means more pushing power and more control over that power, self-control, right? Not our bit, not our spur. And so quickening the tempo is an advancement of balance, but just trying to get our horse's hind legs into a specific tempo is wicked hard.
I
And
agree.
a metronome is really for us.
Right.
It's not for the horse. It's for us to,
I like even starting people with the metronome walking on the ground with their horse.
oh yeah, a lot of people
It's
can't do that.
they can't do it.
No, and what we see in upper level competition now with these labored canter pirouettes and
Mm,
terrible piafs, I go, that's because what makes it look labored is the horse can't hold the tempo
right.
during a very tight turn, which is a pirouette, or in place, which is a piaffe, or controlled into passage. So all of these maneuvers that require agility, if a horse doesn't have impulsion at the easiest end of the scale,
Right.
then all of those sort of challenging maneuvers are compromised.
I
So I
agree.
find, like, for example, when I'm just beginning to work on a specific tempo, so the horse has self-control and is self-propelled to the extent that I go, I don't really need my aids to maintain a walk or maintain a trot or a little bit of canter. Then I'm going to start refining that balance by using a metronome. And I just have one on my phone, but I found like 60 beats per minute for a walk is kind of a nice challenge, not too hard, but I try to match the tempo to the rhythm that the horse naturally chooses.
I think that's an important thing to go over, that what they naturally do may not be what we think it is. We have to kind of
Right.
listen for what that is.
So if the horse is a little bit quick, I would pick a higher tempo, quicker
For
tempo.
now.
If the horse is really still slow, I would not try to push the horse into a quick tempo too fast. But even if we like find a tempo that very closely matches what our horse is choosing as we begin working on impulsion, just the precision of it is the challenge.
The thought, just putting that tick tock in your head, it's totally another intervention.
Well, the precision of like when I'm working with a horse, I like to feel each hind leg moving in time with the tempo. So in the walk, I just pay attention to the hind legs. In the trot, you're on a diagonal pair anyways, so
Right.
2 beats is easy. And then in a canter, even a slow tempo goes way too fast. So I tend to just try to get the tempo of the leading front leg.
It's like the waltz.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
But if you listen to 3 beeps while you're in a canter, it's like overwhelming. So
Yeah.
I just try to find the
Hit the
tempo
one,
of the
the
one
one.
leading leg, right? The one stride by itself. And I try to find a tempo, like I'll go up and down the metronome, maybe if the horse is on the lunge line, and try to find one that's sort of in
Goes
range
with
with
them.
what my horse is choosing. But it's the precision of those beeps. This is where we get into using a half halt and what I call a half push, like a
Right.
half leg aid and a half halt.
Yeah,
And the mysterious half halt, demystified, it's
it is.
just a like tapping the brakes,
Yeah,
right?
it's great when it works.
So we might use a little bit of rain resistance, maybe resist with our back and our core, but a half halt just means slowing down a little within the gait you're in. That's all it
I think you
means.
brought up a really important thing that we do that maybe a lot of people don't is we're using our head, neck, back, and pelvis organization to slow the horse down,
Yeah, we're using
not reins.
basically our muscles are the brake pads.
Right.
So when we lengthen our back muscles and we tighten our core, we tighten around our seat, we tighten along our spine, that literally creates the resistant
Right.
force
Right.
that the horse doesn't have yet. And then shortening the reins or using the reins to help our horse slow down, that's the backup plan.
That's the emergency brake, I say.
Yeah, that's when I want a full halt because
Right.
my back muscles are the half
Aren't
halt,
working. Right.
right? So once I'm working with tempo, I might have to be kind of quick between my legs, giving a little half push to quicken the strides, or my back muscles, a little bit of reins to just give a little half halt and slow the tempo a bit. But within that, like if you watch some of these old-fashioned riders, these horses are going through jump courses, doing pirouettes, doing all these fancy maneuvers without losing the rhythm of the canter. That's the hardest part of it because what a horse has to do to maintain rhythm, and this is why tracking up has screwed things up so bad, is in order to maintain that precise balance between self-propelled and self-controlled, they have to shorten the stride length to do a
Hmm.
tight turn.
Right.
They have to lengthen the stride length on a straighter line. They have to be able to kind of adjust the miles per hour in order to not lose the rhythm.
Right.
And what we're looking for is length of stride and fast speeds. We've completely destroyed our horse's ability to maintain a
I
rhythm.
agree. We think we need to micromanage what they do, and it's not
Yeah.
true.
So if we, and rhythm is actually the bottom of the German training scale pyramid. It's like rhythm is really important because that's most directly reflected to balance and correct use.
Right.
Stride length and speed, I go, that can kind of be faked
That's
or
easy for us to look at, but it's not the way to go.
and I think that's why humans latch onto it because it's easy to
It's
see
easy to see.
and
We
it's
are
easy
so
to get.
visual, right?
Yeah. But tempo, and we need to hear tempo. I don't think any rider can actually develop impulsion without using a metronome or a song. Oh, and that's the other thing. I Googled like the beats per minute I was using to see if there was any kind of song or playlist I could use for that beat for like 60 beats per minute. Oh my God. Like all these playlists came up with
Oh,
that
that's cool.
specific tempo. So if we'd rather work to music, we can choose music, but the beeps actually kind of help us learn. So I recommend both, but one will feel easier than the other.
Right.
And I have lots of students who have to do this first, just maybe, dragging their horse around on a lead line
Yeah.
or
Just to
hand
get
walking.
figure out the rhythm.
Yeah, because if we can't hold that rhythm in our own bodies, if we have
Right.
no ability to dance, if we got no rhythm,
Right. If we don't have self-carriage, how do we expect our horses to?
right. And
Bam.
and so
Sorry.
what we're really doing to know when to give the leg aid and when to give the rein aid using a metronome is because we feel that steady rhythm in
Hmm.
our body. And the metronome, just a beep, 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 is an outside consistency that really helps us separate from our horse. And without that consistent sound of music or beeps, people don't realize the horse sped up a little or slowed down a little.
No, they don't. They just go with it. And
Yeah, because it's so subtle, we
yeah,
just don't notice it,
right.
and we want to be in harmony with the horse. So we sort of speed up and slow down as our horse does. And so having that metronome is just like, oh, it's an epiphany the
Yeah, it
first time
is.
you try it.
Yeah, start walking on the ground, my friends.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other interesting thing that came up uh when I Googled 60 beats per minute was apparently that specific tempo helps activate alpha brainwaves, which I thought was
That's
fascinating
fascinating.
because I always thought it was just rhythmic movement, but I'm wondering if different tempos don't have an effect
A
on
different, right, rhythms
different.
affect different parts of the brain. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so it's almost like a moving meditation for the human to walk in that tempo. And the one thing I saw across the board when I would have students start to work with a metronome was everybody relaxed. The horse relaxed, got,
Hmm.
really focused. It's like there was just this big chill out
Right.
within the training session. And I go, maybe that explains it. Maybe that particular,
Well, we're not we can't micromanage and listen to the metronome.
yeah. But I was just
We take
shocked
away us doing instead of just being. The metronome makes us be present with what's going on
every stride.
every stride. So
Yeah,
all that other noise that we think we need to bring to the equation goes out the window.
that's a good point.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
just,
we learn to focus.
we learn to focus better.
Yeah. And then feel the stillness within the motion, which is impulsion, which is tempo or
Right.
rhythm. Yeah. All right. I think any final thing you want to add? But
No,
I thought that was fascinating. Like now I want to kind of Google different tempos because 60 beats per
yeah,
minute.
different songs. That might be fun.
Yeah, like I came up with that tempo for several horses as a remedial beginning of developing impulsion because it was just close to their natural choice. And then when I saw it sort of stimulates alpha brainwaves, I went, isn't that fascinating?
Helpful to the human.
Yeah. I go, because if it's doing it for humans, it's probably doing it for our horses
Good.
too.
Right.
And that
Being
was
in
the
that
other
state.
one of the last things I want to add is I always play music and the metronome out loud. I never do it with headphones because I
Interesting. That
swear,
takes in a whole different atmosphere.
no, I swear that the horse listens to it.
Oh, there you go.
I swear. And that they want to kind of match that sound with their movement. So
That's fun
I really feel like the horses listen. And so I never just do it with earphones. I always play it out loud to,
on your phone
my phone's in my
pocket.
waistband while I'm
Right.
riding or something like that. But as long as the horse can hear it while we're working on it, I think it works even faster.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So thanks, everybody. And thank you for subscribing. Welcome to the new subscribers on YouTube.
Yes.
Thank you for downloading on the podcast platforms and commenting, liking, sharing, subscribing, all of that. If you think this is good stuff to get out in the horse world, then please help share it and spread it
Yeah.
around.
Ask questions. Send us questions. We love it.
Oh, yeah. Questions are always good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
See you next time.